He planned every detail to showcase his success and gorgeous new wife. But when three little voices yelled "Daddy" across the ballroom, champagne glasses shattered on marble floors. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the Atlantic Pearl, casting golden light across the polished tables Emma Sullivan had just finished setting. She paused by the large bay window, allowing herself a moment to watch the fishing boats returning to Boston Harbor. Their weathered hulls and salt-crusted riggings told stories of struggle and triumph against the endless sea, stories that always resonated with something deep inside her. Dreaming about sailing away again? Marcus, the head chef, called from the kitchen doorway. Emma smiled, tucking a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. Just taking a breath before the dinner rush. At 28, Emma had mastered the choreography of high-end service. Her movements were graceful and efficient as she arranged silverware with precision, her blue uniform crisp despite having been on her feet since 11 that morning. The Atlantic Pearl wasn't just Boston's finest seafood restaurant. It was her anchor in a life that had once seemed without direction, until Jackson Reed had walked in 2 years ago. The memory flooded back as it often did when she stood by this window. Jackson, tanned from a week in Cape Cod, had come in alone one rainy Tuesday evening. She remembered how out of place his casual designer clothes had seemed among the businessmen in suits, how his confident smile had caught her off guard when she approached his table. "What would you recommend to someone who's never had proper Boston seafood?" he'd asked, his New York accent unmistakable. "That would depend on whether you're brave enough for the real experience," she'd replied with a playful confidence that surprised even herself. He'd laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that didn't match his otherwise polished appearance. "I'm a Wall Street risk analyst. Brave is my middle name." By dessert, he'd confessed he was extending his Cape Cod vacation by 3 days and asked if she might show him around the real Boston. Something about the way he'd looked at her like he was genuinely seeing her had made her say yes. "Earth to Emma," Marcus called again. "Your boyfriend's on the phone." The memory dissolved as Emma hurried to the staff area, picking up the kitchen extension. "Hey you," Jackson's voice came through, rich and warm despite the cellular distortion. "Just checking if we're still on for this weekend? The company jet can pick you up Friday afternoon." "Yes, I switched shifts with Denise," Emma replied, fighting the small flutter in her stomach that still appeared whenever he mentioned casual access to private jets. After 2 years, the disparities in their worlds remained jarring. "Perfect. I've got dinner reservations at Le Bernardin and tickets to that revival of Chicago you mentioned wanting to see." After hanging up, Emma checked her reflection in the small mirror by the staff lockers. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the one who'd served Jackson Reed 2 years ago. More confident, perhaps, but also caught between worlds. Every other weekend was spent in Manhattan, in a reality so removed from her daily life that sometimes it felt like stepping into a movie. 3 months later, Emma stood frozen in the center of Jackson's penthouse, suitcases surrounding her, floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park in winter splendor, snow dusting the treetops in a postcard-perfect view that cost more per square foot than her entire apartment building in Boston. "This is too much," she whispered, afraid to touch anything in the immaculate space that was now, apparently, her home too. Jackson wrapped his arms around her from behind, his reflection joining hers in the window. "Nothing's too much for us. This is just the beginning, Em." That first night in New York, as Jackson slept beside her, Emma had stared at the ceiling, wondering if she would ever feel like she truly belonged in his world. The penthouse was designed by someone featured in Architectural Digest. The doorman knew the names of every resident's pets. The elevator required a special key just to access this floor. Within weeks, the discomfort crystallized during a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. Draped in a borrowed designer dress, Emma had overheard Jackson's mother introducing her to another socialite. "This is Emma, Jackson's girl from Boston," the elegant older woman had said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "She's a hospitality professional." The way she'd avoided the word waitress had been both a kindness and a subtle reinforcement of the gulf between their worlds. Jackson had seemed oblivious to these undercurrents, proudly introducing Emma to colleagues and friends. "She's the most authentic person I've ever met," he'd tell people, as if her lack of pedigree was an exotic quality he'd discovered. On a frigid December evening, almost a year after moving to New York, Emma paced the penthouse, occasionally glancing at her phone to check the time. Jackson had texted that he was running late, big news at the office he couldn't wait to share. In the bathroom, hidden in her toiletry bag, was the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning. 2 pink lines had appeared so quickly she'd barely had time to set the plastic stick down. A blood test at a clinic during her lunch break had confirmed it. She'd spent the afternoon in a daze, walking through Central Park despite the biting cold, imagining their child running through these same paths. A family with Jackson, it would cement her place in his world, bridge the invisible divide she still felt at every society function. At 9:30, she heard the front door open. Jackson burst in, his face flushed with excitement, snowflakes melting on his camel hair coat. "Em, where are you? I've got champagne," he called out. She emerged from the bedroom, heart hammering. Jackson stood in the kitchen, placing an expensive bottle of Dom Perignon on the marble counter. "What are we celebrating?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. His grin was triumphant as he shrugged off his coat. "They did it. They named me VP of Investment Strategy, youngest in Goldman's history." He loosened his tie, eyes bright with victory. "Baker says I'm on track to make executive director within 5 years, maybe even CEO by 40. "Jackson, that's amazing," she said, meaning it despite her nervousness. His ambition was part of what had drawn her to him, his absolute certainty that the future held only success. "I know we said we'd wait for your birthday, but—" He reached for the champagne, working the cork with practiced ease. "Some occasions demand immediate celebration." The cork popped, and Jackson poured the bubbling liquid into 2 crystal flutes. He handed one to Emma, raising his own in toast. "To us, and the future that's unfolding exactly as planned," he said. Emma looked at the champagne, then back at Jackson's expectant face. "I can't drink this." His smile faltered. "Just 1 glass won't hurt. It's our moment." She set the untouched glass on the counter. "Jackson, I'm pregnant." The transition happened in slow motion. His smile froze, then fractured. Confusion crossed his features, followed by disbelief, and finally, something Emma had never seen directed at her before: cold disdain. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering against the imported Persian carpet, liquid seeping into the delicate fibers. "A child? Now? You're joking," he said, his voice suddenly foreign. "I took a test this morning, then had it confirmed at a clinic," she explained, reaching for his hand. "We're going to have a baby." He jerked away from her touch. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The words came out like ice shards. "I'm 1 step away from becoming the youngest executive director in company history, and you get pregnant?" "I thought you'd be happy," Emma whispered, arms wrapping protectively around her still flat stomach. "We've talked about having children someday." "Someday. Not now. Not when everything is finally falling into place." He paced the living room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "God, Emma, why didn't you take care of it?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "Take care of it? This is our child." "It's a complication we don't need," he snapped. "My parents are finally warming up to you. The board was starting to see me as serious executive material, not some playboy with a flavor of the month." "Flavor of the month?" The words barely made it past her constricted throat. "We've been together almost 3 years." Jackson's laugh was hollow. "And in those 3 years, have you ever truly fit in? Be honest, Emma. You still feel uncomfortable at every function. You still don't know which fork to use without checking what others do first. Hours passed in a nightmarish blur. Jackson alternated between cold fury and something worse, calculating assessment, as if she were a bad investment he needed to liquidate. Around midnight, he opened his laptop. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, her voice raw from crying. "Transferring funds from our joint account. You'll need money to resolve this situation." His fingers moved efficiently over the keyboard. "My career can't afford a scandal or distraction right now. This isn't a situation to resolve. It's a baby. Our baby." He looked up, his expression blank. "You never belonged in this world, Emma. A waitress from Boston raising the heir to one of Manhattan's largest fortunes? Nobody would bet $1 on your future. You're an investment doomed to fail." The words cut deeper than any physical pain she'd ever experienced. Jackson continued without emotion. "You need to be practical. This isn't some romantic movie where love conquers all. This is real life. My life. A life with responsibilities and expectations you can't begin to comprehend." By 2 in the morning, Emma sat numb on the edge of the bed while Jackson methodically packed her belongings into a single suitcase. He left out the designer clothes he'd bought her, the jewelry, anything that connected her to his world. "I've called you a car," he said, checking his watch. "It will take you wherever you need to go. Tomorrow my lawyers will contact you with an agreement." "Jackson, please," Emma whispered, one hand still protectively covering her stomach. "Don't do this to us." His face hardened. "There is no us. There never really was. You were a fantasy I indulged in too long." He set the suitcase by the door. "Solve your problem and don't contact me again." The finality in his voice was absolute. He held the door open, waiting for her to leave. Snow fell heavily outside as Emma, clutching her coat around her, stepped into the hallway. The penthouse door closed behind her with a soft, expensive click, a sound like a tomb sealing shut over her dreams. Emma wandered the frigid streets of Manhattan in a daze, her thin coat inadequate against the December storm. Luxury hotels loomed on every corner, their warmth visible through golden windows but impossibly out of reach with the meager cash in her purse. The joint account she'd relied on showed a zero balance when she checked her banking app. Around dawn, she found herself in Brooklyn, led by a sympathetic all-night diner waitress to a women's support center. The intake coordinator, a tired woman with kind eyes, showed her to a metal bunk bed in a room shared with 3 other women. "The doctor volunteers on Thursdays," she explained, noting Emma's protective hand over her stomach. "She can check you then." Thursday arrived with bitter cold and Emma's first bout of morning sickness. The volunteer doctor, a gray-haired woman named Dr. Chen, set up portable ultrasound equipment in what was normally the center's counseling room. "Let's see what we've got," she said gently, spreading cold gel across Emma's abdomen. The grainy image appeared on the small screen, and Dr. Chen's experienced eyes narrowed in concentration. She moved the wand, checked something, then moved it again, her expression changing subtly. "Is something wrong?" Emma asked, fear constricting her throat. "Not wrong," Dr. Chen replied slowly, "but I'm seeing multiple heartbeats." She pointed to the screen. 1, 2, 3 distinct embryonic sacs. You're carrying triplets, my dear." The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma as she stared at the tiny flickering lights on the screen. 3 babies, 3 heartbeats, 3 lives depending entirely on her. "How far along?" she managed to ask. "About 8 weeks, I'd estimate. You'll need specialized prenatal care. Multiple pregnancies are higher risk." That night, curled on her narrow metal bunk while another woman sobbed softly across the room, Emma wrapped her arms around her still flat stomach. 3 babies. Jackson's words echoed in her mind, an investment doomed to fail, as tears slid silently down her face. "I'll prove him wrong," she whispered to the tiny lives inside her. "I'll prove him wrong about all of us." The following months became a nightmare of survival. Emma secured a morning shift at a diner near the shelter, worked afternoons as a pharmacy cashier, and spent evenings as a data entry clerk. She slept 4 hours a night, her growing belly making even that minimal rest uncomfortable. Jackson's only contact came through a stone-faced lawyer who presented her with documents in the diner during her break. "My client offers this settlement in exchange for your complete confidentiality and renunciation of any paternity claims." Emma scanned the insulting sum offered, barely enough for 6 months' rent in a decent apartment, and deliberately tore the document in half, then quarters, then eighths, dropping the pieces into her water glass. "Tell your client I don't want his money. Tell him these children will never know his name." When the triplets, Noah, Ethan, and Liam, arrived 7 weeks premature, Emma faced labor alone, coached only by hospital staff who took pity on the single mother with no emergency contacts listed. Each boy weighed less than 4 pounds, their tiny bodies connected to a maze of tubes and monitors in the NICU. Standing before the incubators, Emma placed one trembling hand against the clear plastic separating her from her sons. "One day, he'll see what he lost," she whispered as tears streamed down her face. "One day, I'll prove every word he said was wrong." The turning point came 6 months later. Emma, exhausted after another double shift at the diner, noticed an elderly customer struggling to use a tablet with hands that trembled from Parkinson's disease. With her background in design and unfinished specialization in assistive technology, she spent that night sketching an adaptive interface prototype. Her sketches caught the attention of a regular customer, a university professor who recognized the innovation in her designs. With his help, she secured a scholarship to complete her studies while developing the project. In her tiny shared apartment, with the triplets sleeping in makeshift cribs fashioned from sturdy cardboard boxes lined with the softest blankets she could afford, Emma whispered her renewed promise. "I'm going to build an empire that will make him choke on every word he said about me, and our sons will be living proof of his greatest mistake." While counting the few dollars remaining from her day's tips, Emma couldn't imagine that 15 years later, her net worth would exceed $2.8 billion, turning Jackson's cruel words into Wall Street's greatest irony. As Emma counted the meager tips from her last shift, she felt a twinge in her abdomen. At 29 weeks pregnant with triplets, her body had become a landscape of aches and unexpected movements. She pressed a hand against the side of her swollen belly, where one of the babies, probably Liam, the most active according to the ultrasound technician, was kicking insistently. "I know, little one," she whispered. "It's cramped in there with your brothers." Dawn light filtered through the thin curtains of her room at the women's shelter. Emma had been lucky. Most residents could stay only 30 days, but her high-risk pregnancy had earned her an extension. Still, she knew this reprieve was temporary. The shelter coordinator had already warned her that once the babies arrived, she would need to find other accommodations. Emma tucked the $27 in tips into an envelope labeled Baby Fund, now containing nearly $400, nowhere near enough for what 3 newborns would need. She checked her watch, a simple timepiece that had belonged to her father. 5:15. Time to start her day. The mirror in the communal bathroom revealed a woman barely recognizable from the one who had stood in Jackson's penthouse 4 months earlier. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her cheeks had hollowed despite her pregnancy, and her once shiny hair hung limp around her face. She splashed cold water on her face and straightened her shoulders. "You can do this," she told her reflection, the same words she repeated every morning. By 6:30, Emma was tying on her apron at Rosie's Diner, where the owner had taken pity on her obvious pregnancy and hired her for the morning shift. Regular customers had begun leaving extra tips after noticing her growing belly, their kindness a stark contrast to the cold calculation of Jackson's abandonment. "You're looking tired today, honey," said Marge, the veteran waitress who had taken Emma under her wing. "Why don't you take table 3? The businessman who comes in every Wednesday. Good tipper, never makes a fuss." Emma nodded gratefully. Her feet had already begun to swell in the cheap sneakers she'd bought to replace the designer flats she'd left behind in New York. Every step sent pain shooting up her legs, but she had no choice. The babies needed food, shelter, medical care, all things that now depended solely on her ability to keep moving forward. "Coffee, black, and the number 4 breakfast," said the businessman without looking up from his Wall Street Journal when Emma approached his table. She froze, the notepad trembling in her hand. The newspaper's headline announced a major promotion at Goldman Sachs, with Jackson's photo prominently displayed. His smile, the same one that had once seemed so genuine when directed at her, beamed confidently from the page. "Miss, did you get that?" The customer looked up impatiently. Emma forced herself to nod, scribbling the order while fighting the nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. During her break, she locked herself in the bathroom stall and finally allowed the tears to come, silent and burning. She gave herself exactly 2 minutes before wiping her face, straightening her uniform, and returning to the floor. That afternoon, Emma stood behind the pharmacy counter, scanning medications with mechanical efficiency. Her second job was less physically demanding than waitressing, but the fluorescent lights and chemical smell made her perpetually nauseated. The pharmacy manager had reluctantly hired her, making it clear that her condition was not ideal for customer-facing positions. "You have 6 more weeks, tops," he reminded her as she restocked the register. "These triplets of yours aren't going to wait for the schedule I made through June." "I know, sir. I'm already interviewing for remote data entry positions I can do after they're born." The lie came easily. There had been no time for interviews, only desperate applications sent during her few free moments. That evening, Emma sat at a computer terminal in a basement office, inputting insurance claim data. The night shift supervisor had allowed her to keep a small electric fan nearby, the only accommodation made for her pregnancy in this windowless room where 5 other desperate people silently typed, each avoiding eye contact, each grateful for the midnight to 4 a.m. shift that paid slightly above minimum wage. The walk back to the shelter at 4:30 in the morning was the most dangerous part of Emma's day. She clutched a small can of pepper spray, eyes constantly scanning the pre-dawn streets of Brooklyn. One hand always rested protectively on her belly, as if her palm alone could shield her unborn sons from the harshness of the world they would soon enter. "Look at you," sneered a shelter resident named Tricia when Emma returned, easing her swollen body onto her bunk. "Working 3 jobs while pregnant with triplets. Either you're a saint or a fool." Emma said nothing, too exhausted to engage. She had exactly 3 hours to sleep before beginning the cycle again. As she drifted off, Jackson's words echoed, "An investment doomed to fail." She curled her body around her belly, whispering to her sons, "We are not failing. We are surviving. And someday, we'll do more than that." The pattern continued for weeks, Emma's body growing more unwieldy as the triplets developed. At her monthly prenatal checkup, covered by emergency Medicaid she'd qualified for after hours of paperwork, the specialist frowned at her blood pressure readings. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm concerned about preeclampsia," the doctor said. "You need bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy." Emma laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Doctor, if I rest, we'll be homeless and hungry." The doctor's expression softened with pity, a look Emma had grown to hate. "There are programs—" "I've applied to every program," Emma interrupted. "I'm on waiting lists. But right now, these 3 jobs are all that stand between my babies and disaster." 2 days later, a man in an expensive suit entered Rosie's diner during Emma's shift. He sat at the counter, watching her work with calculating eyes before approaching as she wiped down an empty table. "Emma Sullivan?" he asked, extending a business card. "Howard Kleinman, attorney at law. I represent Jackson Reed." Her hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. "I have nothing to say to him or his representatives." The lawyer smiled thinly. "My client wishes to resolve this situation amicably. He slid an envelope across the table. "This contains a settlement offer and confidentiality agreement. Mr. Reed is prepared to be generous in exchange for your discretion and renunciation of any paternity claims." Emma opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The check inside represented more money than she currently had, but it was insultingly inadequate for raising 3 children, especially when compared to Jackson's wealth. The attached document required her to waive all rights to child support, acknowledge that Jackson had no paternal obligations, and promise never to publicly identify him as the father. Looking directly into the lawyer's eyes, Emma deliberately tore the document into pieces, dropping them into her water pitcher. The lawyer's composed expression flickered with surprise. "Tell your client that my children aren't a situation to be resolved with hush money," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And they're certainly worth more than this insulting amount. Ms. Sullivan, be reasonable. Single motherhood is difficult enough with 1 child. With triplets, without family support. We'll manage," Emma cut him off. "And one day, these boys will be living proof of what their father threw away." The lawyer gathered his briefcase, his expression hardening. "This was a one-time offer. Mr. Reed will not approach you again." "Good," Emma replied, "because the next time I see Jackson Reed will be when I've built something so extraordinary that he'll be forced to recognize what he abandoned." That night, labor pains began 7 weeks before her due date. Alone in the shelter bathroom, Emma clutched the sink as contractions tore through her body. Another resident called an ambulance, and Emma was rushed to the nearest hospital, fear gripping her heart as she thought of her sons arriving too early, too small. The delivery room was a blur of medical personnel and urgent voices. "Multiple birth, premature, prepare NICU," someone called out. Emma lay under harsh lights, tears streaming down her face as she pushed through excruciating pain without any hand to hold. "You can do this," a kind-eyed nurse told her, echoing Emma's daily mantra to herself. "Your babies need you to be strong now." After hours of labor, Noah arrived first, his cry alarmingly weak. Ethan followed 7 minutes later, and Liam 3 minutes after that. Each boy weighed less than 4 pounds. Their tiny bodies whisked immediately to incubators. "Can I see them?" Emma asked, her voice raw from screaming. "Soon," promised the nurse. "They're being stabilized." It was nearly 12 hours before Emma, still weak from delivery, was wheeled into the NICU. The sight of her sons, impossibly small, connected to a maze of tubes and monitors, broke something open inside her. Each translucent incubator contained a miniature fighter, their tiny chests rising and falling with determined breaths. "They're beautiful," she whispered, placing her palm against the clear plastic barrier separating her from Noah, whose incubator was nearest. "And strong, like their mother." The NICU nurse smiled gently. "They're fighters, all 3. That's good. They'll need to be." For 2 weeks, Emma lived at the hospital, sleeping in a chair beside the incubators when permitted, expressing breast milk every 3 hours, and learning everything she could about caring for premature triplets. She lost her 3 jobs, but for once couldn't bring herself to care about anything beyond the survival of her tiny sons. On a particularly difficult night, when Ethan's oxygen levels had dipped dangerously low, Emma watched an elderly patient in the adjacent ward struggling to use the hospital's tablet system to make a video call to his family. His hands, trembling with Parkinson's, couldn't manage the standard touch interface. Something clicked in Emma's mind, a connection to her unfinished studies in assistive technology. She found a napkin and pen in her purse and began sketching a simpler interface design, with larger touch areas and gesture recognition that would accommodate tremors. The next morning, Emma noticed Professor Alan Winters in the hospital cafeteria, a regular customer from Rosie's Diner who taught computer science at Brooklyn College. Gathering her courage, she approached his table. "Professor Winters? I'm Emma from the diner." He looked up, recognition dawning. "Emma, yes. I heard you'd left suddenly. Are you all right?" "I had my babies early," she explained, gesturing toward the NICU. "Triplet boys." "Congratulations," he said warmly, then noted her exhaustion. "And condolences on what must be a challenging time." Emma hesitated, then pulled out her napkin sketches. "I know this is presumptuous, but you once mentioned your department works on assistive technology. I saw a patient struggling with the hospital tablets and I had an idea." The professor examined her drawings with growing interest. "This isn't just a sketch, Emma. This is a solution to a real problem." He looked up at her. "Did you study design?" "I was halfway through a degree with specialization in assistive tech when life happened." Professor Winters pulled out a business card. "When you're ready, when your boys are stable, call me. I think we could find you a scholarship to complete your studies while developing this concept. The adaptive technology program always needs minds like yours." For the first time in months, a spark of hope ignited in Emma's chest. That night, in the dimly lit NICU, she whispered to her sleeping sons, "We're going to build something amazing together, something your father never believed possible." 6 weeks later, the triplets were finally strong enough to leave the hospital. Emma had secured a tiny apartment through a program for women in crisis, furnished with donated items and makeshift cribs constructed from sturdy boxes lined with the softest blankets she could find. Professor Winters had helped her secure a partial scholarship to complete her degree while developing her adaptive interface concept. As she settled the sleeping infants in their temporary beds, Emma ran a gentle finger along each tiny cheek, marveling at their perfect features that unmistakably echoed Jackson's. "I promise you'll never feel unwanted," she whispered. "And I promise we'll prove him wrong about all of us." While sitting on the floor of her small apartment, watching her triplets finally sleeping peacefully, Emma couldn't imagine that the napkin sketch she'd made would become the first page in the story of a technological empire valued at billions of dollars. Emma stared at the napkin in her hands, tracing the interface design she'd sketched in the NICU. Professor Winters' business card sat on the wobbly table beside her, promising a lifeline she hadn't dared hope for just days ago. The triplets slept in their makeshift cribs, their synchronized breathing a gentle soundtrack to her renewed determination. 3 weeks later, Emma stood nervously at the entrance to Brooklyn College's registration office, the stroller containing her 3 two-month-old sons drawing curious glances from passing students. The babies, still smaller than average but growing steadily, were bundled against the autumn chill. "I have an appointment with the scholarship committee," she told the receptionist, trying to project confidence despite her worn clothing and the dark circles under her eyes. "Name?" the woman asked, barely glancing up. "Emma Sullivan." The woman checked her computer. "Yes, partial scholarship application for the design technology program, returning student status." She handed Emma a stack of forms. "Fill these out completely. The committee meets in 20 minutes. As Emma juggled paperwork while keeping the stroller rocking with one foot, a memory flashed of Jackson mocking her educational background. "A half-finished degree from a second-rate college," he'd said during their final argument. She pressed the pen harder against the paper. "Yes, I'll be attending part-time while working," Emma confirmed to the scholarship coordinator 30 minutes later, sitting before a panel of 3 professors, including Professor Winters, who offered an encouraging smile. "Ms. Sullivan," said the department chair, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, "your academic record from 3 years ago shows promise, but your situation—" She glanced meaningfully at the triplets, who miraculously remained sleeping. "Our concern is your ability to complete the program given your considerable responsibilities." Emma straightened her spine. "My sons are my motivation, not my limitation. I've arranged childcare through a subsidized program, and I've secured part-time employment that will accommodate my class schedule." The lie about employment slipped out easily. She had applications pending but nothing confirmed. Still, Emma maintained unwavering eye contact with each committee member. "And your project proposal," the third professor said, reviewing her napkin sketch now transferred to proper design paper. This adaptive interface for individuals with motor limitations. It's innovative but ambitious. Sometimes the most necessary innovations come from witnessing real struggles, Emma replied. My background in design combined with my interest in assistive technology puts me in a unique position to develop this concept. Professor Winters nodded approvingly. Emma's preliminary design already addresses issues our department has been struggling with. I believe she could make a significant contribution to our assistive technology initiative. 2 hours later, Emma exited the building with conditional acceptance to the program and a partial scholarship that would cover 60% of her tuition. The remaining 40%, plus living expenses, childcare costs, and necessities for 3 growing babies, loomed like a mountain before her. The apartment Emma had secured through the Women's Crisis Program was a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood even Brooklyn real estate agents avoided describing. Each evening, she carried the triplets and stroller up 4 flights of stairs, 1 baby at a time before collapsing onto the threadbare couch that doubled as her bed. By October, Emma had established a brutal routine that defied human endurance. She woke at 4 each morning to study while the babies slept, prepared bottles and changed diapers at 5, delivered all 3 to a subsidized daycare center at 6:30, attended classes from 7 to noon, worked a half shift at a new diner from 12:30 to 4, picked up the triplets by 5, and programmed until midnight when the cycle began again. Her body protested the punishing schedule. Milk leaked through her shirt during classes as she missed pumping sessions. Her hands developed calluses from writing code for hours after handling hot plates and scrubbing tables. Sleep became a luxury afforded in 30-minute increments between feedings. "You look like death warmed over," remarked her programming professor after class one day. "Brilliant work on the interface prototype, but at what cost?" Emma managed a tired smile. Everything worthwhile has a price. At 4 months old, the triplets began showing distinct personalities. Noah, the firstborn, observed the world with serious eyes that seemed to calculate possibilities. Ethan vocalized constantly, his babbling forming the soundtrack of their tiny apartment. Liam, the smallest at birth, now moved with surprising energy, rolling over weeks before developmental charts suggested he should. Emma recorded every milestone in a journal, each entry a private victory against Jackson's dismissal. When Noah recognized his name, when Ethan laughed for the first time, when Liam grasped a toy with perfect coordination, each moment cataloged as evidence of their extraordinary potential. During a rare moment of peace one evening, with all 3 babies asleep simultaneously, Emma's phone rang. Professor Winters' name flashed on the screen. "Emma, are you sitting down?" he asked when she answered. "I showed your interface prototype to a colleague who works with Parkinson's patients. He was impressed enough to connect me with someone you should meet." 3 days later, Emma sat across from Daniel Freeman in a coffee shop near campus, the triplets with a neighbor who had offered 2 hours of childcare in exchange for Emma's help with tax forms. Freeman, a compact man with shrewd eyes and practical clothing that nonetheless screamed money to Emma's newly calibrated senses, examined her prototype interface on a tablet. "Professor Winters oversold you," he said bluntly, setting the tablet down. "This isn't revolutionary, yet." Emma's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "It's a preliminary design. With proper development, that's exactly what interests me," Freeman interrupted. "I invest in potential, early-stage ventures with practical applications." He slid a business card across the table. "I have $30,000 that says you can turn this concept into a working prototype within 6 months." Emma stared at the card, pulse quickening. "30,000? "For 15% equity in whatever this becomes," Freeman clarified. "Enough to build your prototype, maybe hire basic help. Not enough to live on. You'll need to keep your day job." 25, Emma countered, surprising herself with her boldness. 25,000 for 10%. I maintain controlling interest and creative direction." Freeman's eyebrows rose. "Winters didn't mention you were a negotiator." "I'm a single mother of triplets," Emma replied evenly. "I negotiate survival daily." A smile cracked Freeman's serious expression. 15%, non-controlling interest, and I'll introduce you to my network when you have something demonstrable. Emma extended her hand. Deal. That night, Emma's hands trembled as she deposited Freeman's check, the first investment in what she'd tentatively named New Beginnings Tech. The amount represented more money than she'd seen since leaving Jackson's penthouse, yet she knew it was merely seed capital, a tiny fraction of what development would ultimately require. "Is it enough?" she whispered to herself, calculating rent, childcare, food, and development costs against the balance. The answer was clearly no, but it was a start. For the next 3 months, Emma operated on pure determination and less than 4 hours of sleep per night. She converted half of her living room into a makeshift office, coding late into the night with the triplets sleeping in their cribs nearby. When they woke for midnight feedings, she bounced them against her shoulder with one hand while reviewing code with the other. The first functional prototype of her adaptive interface emerged just as the triplets reached their first birthday. Emma tested it with 3 Parkinson's patients from a local support group, recording their interactions and refining the system based on their feedback. "I haven't been able to text my granddaughter in years," confessed Henry, a 74-year-old former accountant with advanced Parkinson's, as he successfully navigated Emma's interface. This changes everything." When Emma showed Freeman the video of Henry making his first video call to his granddaughter, the elderly man's joy as he connected independently for the first time in years, the investor recognized they had crossed a critical threshold. "We need to record this professionally," Freeman said, already making calls. "Human stories sell technology better than technical specifications ever could." The video, professionally edited and posted online, accumulated 50,000 views within a week. A local news station picked up the story, interviewing Emma briefly about her mission to make technology accessible to those with motor limitations. As the triplets reached 18 months, their development continued to astound everyone who encountered them. Noah recognized shapes and colors well beyond standard milestones. Ethan formed simple sentences months ahead of schedule. Liam displayed remarkable dexterity, solving simple puzzles designed for children twice his age. "They're quite extraordinary," remarked their pediatrician during a checkup, "especially considering their premature birth and challenging circumstances." Emma couldn't help the pride that swelled in her chest. "They're proving people wrong every day," she replied, thinking of Jackson's dismissal. The viral success of Henry's video attracted a larger investor, Maxwell Innovations, a mid-sized technology investment firm specializing in accessibility solutions. Their representative, Sophia Chen, visited Emma's apartment-turned-office space, visibly surprised by the modest surroundings where groundbreaking technology was being developed. "Your operation is smaller than we anticipated," Chen admitted, watching the triplets play in their gated area while Emma demonstrated the second-generation interface. "Size doesn't determine impact," Emma replied calmly. "We've achieved significant results with minimal resources." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "That efficiency is appealing to our firm. We're prepared to offer $250,000 for 30% equity, with additional funding contingent on developmental milestones." Emma shook her head. 15% equity, with me retaining complete creative control. The technology's potential value far exceeds your current valuation. 30% is standard for an operation at this stage, Chen countered, especially one being run from a living room by a single developer with 3 toddlers underfoot. "Those 3 toddlers are why I won't accept standard terms," Emma stated firmly. "This company is their future. I won't dilute their inheritance for quick capital." The negotiation continued for hours, with Emma refusing to budge on key points despite the desperately needed funding being dangled before her. Finally, Chen relented. 15%, with benchmarks for additional funding, she agreed reluctantly, but Maxwell Innovations expects exceptional results for this exceptional arrangement. "You'll have them," Emma promised. As she signed her first significant investment contract, Emma had no idea that in just 5 years she would reject a $30 million acquisition offer, calling it ridiculously undervalued, to the astonishment of the very same investor now shaking her hand. 3 years passed like a hurricane, relentless and transformative. The New Beginnings office had expanded from Emma's living room to a modest suite in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn's industrial district. 15 employees now occupied the open workspace, their energy palpable as they refined the second generation of adaptive applications that had put the company on the technological map. Emma stood at the window of her small private office, watching the sunrise paint the Manhattan skyline gold. At 31, she bore little resemblance to the devastated pregnant woman Jackson had discarded. Her honey-blonde hair was now cut in a practical shoulder-length style, her wardrobe comprised of simple, quality pieces that projected capability rather than fashion. The dark circles under her eyes had become a permanent feature, badges of her relentless schedule. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Triplets, developmental assessment, 4 p.m. Emma smiled despite her exhaustion. Noah, Ethan, and Liam had just turned 4, each developing at a pace that astonished their pediatrician. Last week she'd found Noah methodically arranging wooden blocks by size and color, creating a perfect gradient. Ethan had memorized an entire children's book after hearing it twice. Liam had disassembled and correctly reassembled a wind-up toy car, his tiny fingers working with surprising dexterity. "Emma?" Her assistant knocked lightly on the doorframe. "The development team is ready for you." The morning dissolved into a blur of coding reviews and interface refinements. Emma's neural adaptive system, which adjusted to users' movement patterns and limitations in real time, was approaching its beta testing phase. If successful, it would revolutionize accessibility for people with motor impairments, from Parkinson's patients to those with cerebral palsy. At noon, Emma slipped away to call the triplets' daycare during her scheduled check-in time. "They're currently in the reading corner," reported Ms. Abernathy, the head teacher. "Noah is reading to the other children. Actually reading, Emma, not reciting from memory. At 4. Pride swelled in Emma's chest. "And the others?" Ethan organized a pretend press conference about dinosaurs. Liam built a working pulley system with craft sticks to lift his juice box to the top of the climbing structure. Emma closed her eyes, savoring these details. Each achievement was ammunition against Jackson's dismissal, proof that her investment was yielding extraordinary returns. By 4 o'clock, Emma had raced across Brooklyn to collect the boys for their appointment with Dr. Harriet Weinstein, a developmental specialist at the Children's Center. The waiting room was filled with parents stealing curious glances at the identical triplets, who sat quietly reviewing picture books while other children their age fidgeted and fussed. "The Sullivan 4?" called the receptionist, and Emma rose, gathering 3 small backpacks and guiding her sons through the door. Dr. Weinstein's assessment was comprehensive and revealing. Each boy performed tasks designed for children 2 to 3 years older, demonstrating cognitive abilities that placed them firmly in the gifted category. "Mrs. Sullivan," Dr. Weinstein began. Emma corrected gently. "My apologies. Ms. Sullivan, your sons have exceptional intellectual capacity. I'd like to recommend them for placement in our program for highly gifted children. It would provide the stimulation they clearly need." Emma looked at her sons, who were now collaboratively building a complex structure with the doctor's assessment blocks. What would that entail? Special classes, enrichment activities, counseling to help them navigate being different. The doctor hesitated. "It's not inexpensive, but there are scholarships." "Cost isn't my primary concern," Emma interrupted, surprising herself with the truth of it. New Beginnings was finally generating enough revenue to provide stability, if not luxury. "I want what's best for them." Later that evening, after tucking the boys into their beds in the 2-bedroom apartment they now called home, Emma collapsed onto her couch and opened her laptop. A news alert caught her eye. Goldman Sachs had announced several executive promotions. Jackson's name appeared halfway down the article, listed as newly appointed Director of Strategic Investments. The photo accompanying the piece showed Jackson in a tailored suit, arm around a willowy blonde woman identified as fiancée Alexei Van Meter of the Philadelphia Van Meters. Their polished smiles and coordinated outfits projected perfect compatibility, a strategic merger of wealth and ambition. Emma closed the browser window, refusing to give him more than a moment of her attention. She returned to coding, losing herself in the complex algorithms that adjusted interface sensitivity based on user tremor patterns. At midnight, a soft voice interrupted her focus. "Mama? I had a bad dream." Emma looked up to find Liam standing in the hallway, clutching his well-worn stuffed elephant. His dark hair, so like Jackson's, was tousled from sleep, his green eyes wide with lingering fear. "Come here, little inventor," she said, opening her arms. Liam climbed into her lap, his small body warm against hers. "Why don't we have a daddy like Tommy does?" he asked suddenly, his question piercing the quiet night. Emma's breath caught. She'd known this question would come eventually, but had hoped for more time to prepare. Now, with her exhausted 4-year-old waiting for answers, she chose honesty without bitterness. "Families come in many different forms," she began carefully. "Some have a mom and dad, some have 2 moms or 2 dads, some have grandparents who raise them. Our family has 1 mom who loves you 3 more than anything in the world. But other kids have dads who play with them and teach them things," Liam persisted. "You have many wonderful men in your lives," Emma countered, thinking of Professor Winters, who now served on her company's advisory board, and Daniel Freeman, whose investment had given New Beginnings its start. "Remember how Mr. Daniel taught you about circuits last week, and how Professor Allen helps with your computer games?" Liam nodded sleepily against her shoulder. "But they're not our daddy." "No," Emma agreed softly. "They're not. Your biological father made choices that took him in a different direction from us." "Does he know about us?" Liam's voice was fading as sleep reclaimed him. "He knows," Emma whispered, stroking his hair. "He just wasn't ready to be your father." The next morning, Emma made 3 important phone calls. The first was to Dr. Weinstein, accepting placement for the triplets in the gifted program. The second was to a recruiter, seeking household staff who could help manage the increasingly complex logistics of raising 3 gifted boys while running a growing company. The third call was to her lawyer, finalizing the paperwork for her first patent application, the Neural Adaptive Interface System that would become New Beginnings' flagship technology. 2 weeks later, Emma interviewed a rotating cast of potential nannies, housekeepers, and tutors. The triplets observed each candidate with solemn eyes, occasionally whispering among themselves in the private language they'd developed. "What about her?" Emma asked after interviewing a former kindergarten teacher with impressive credentials. "She talked to us like we're babies," Noah replied, his vocabulary startlingly advanced. "And she smelled like too many flowers." Emma hired Maria Santiago, a practical woman in her 50s with experience raising gifted children and a no-nonsense approach that the triplets immediately respected. With Maria managing the household and providing after-school care, Emma could finally focus fully on growing New Beginnings during business hours. The company expanded rapidly over the next 18 months. Emma's patented neural adaptive system received FDA approval for use in medical settings, opening doors to hospitals and rehabilitation centers nationwide. New Beginnings moved to larger offices, growing to 50 employees, then 80, as demand for their technology increased. On the triplets' 5th birthday, Emma hosted a small celebration at their apartment. The boys, now attending the prestigious Brookfield Academy for Gifted Children on partial scholarship, had invited a carefully selected group of friends, mostly older children with similar intellectual interests. Professor Winters presented each boy with personalized science kits. "These young men," he told Emma proudly, "are going to change the world someday, Emma watched as Noah methodically organized a complex treasure hunt for the guests. Ethan charmed parents with his articulate conversation, and Liam demonstrated a simple robot he'd built from a kit. Their features, the sharp jawline, intense green eyes, and expressive eyebrows, were increasingly reminiscent of Jackson, a genetic echo that sometimes caught her off guard. That night, after the guests had departed and the triplets were asleep, Emma received an email from her patent attorney. The neural adaptive interface had been officially registered, the culmination of 3 years' development. "This technology is worth millions," he'd written, "potentially billions with proper application and market penetration. You've created something revolutionary, Emma." 6 months later, New Beginnings occupied a full floor in a renovated industrial building overlooking the East River. The company had grown to 150 employees with specialized teams dedicated to medical applications, consumer products, and research advancement. Emma's routine had evolved into a carefully orchestrated balance of executive leadership and motherhood. She arrived at the office by 7 each morning after helping the triplets prepare for school. Her executive assistant managed her calendar with military precision, blocking out time for school events and family dinners with the same priority as board meetings and investor presentations. The boys, now in kindergarten but taking accelerated classes with second graders, continued to develop their distinct personalities. Noah emerged as the analytical strategist, approaching problems with methodical precision. Ethan's natural charisma and verbal abilities made him a natural leader among his peers. Liam's inventive mind constantly sought to understand how things worked, taking apart and improving everything from toys to household appliances. Emma consciously surrounded them with positive male influences. Their favorite teachers, coaches, and several of her trusted colleagues became regular presences in their lives. She was determined that her sons would have strong male role models, even without a father. When Forbes magazine requested an interview with Emma for their Entrepreneurs to Watch feature, she hesitated, protective of her privacy and cautious about exposure that might eventually reach Jackson. But her marketing director persuaded her that the visibility would benefit the company, particularly as they prepared to launch their consumer product line. The resulting article, New Beginnings: How Emma Sullivan Revolutionized Adaptive Technology, mentioned her status as a single mother of triplets, but focused primarily on her technological innovations and business acumen. No mention was made of Jackson or abandonment, though the piece alluded to overcoming significant personal challenges in her journey. The day the article was published, Emma received multiple acquisition offers, including one from a major technology conglomerate for $30 million, an amount that would have seemed unimaginable 3 years earlier. "This is a good offer," advised her CFO during an emergency executive meeting. "The market is volatile, and this guarantees security." Emma shook her head. "It's not nearly enough. What we're building is worth exponentially more, both financially and in terms of human impact." When she rejected the offer, calling it ridiculously undervalued, the original investor who had shaken her hand in that Brooklyn coffee shop stared in astonishment, finally recognizing that the determined single mother he'd taken a chance on had transformed into a visionary leader with unshakable confidence in her creation's worth. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the New Beginnings headquarters as Emma cut the ceremonial ribbons stretched across the entrance. Applause erupted from the gathered employees and press, camera flashes capturing the moment when Emma Sullivan, once a discarded waitress, officially opened the doors to her company's first owned building. "5 years ago, I sketched an idea on a napkin while watching my premature triplets fight for their lives," Emma addressed the crowd, her voice steady and confident. "Today, that idea has grown into something that's changing lives across the country." The 5-story building in Boston's emerging tech corridor represented everything Emma had fought for. Clean lines, abundant natural light, and the distinctive New Beginnings logo, a stylized rising sun, made the structure both beautiful and unmistakable. Most importantly, it was entirely owned by the company. not leased or borrowed. A physical manifestation of permanence that Emma had craved since that snowy night in Manhattan. Noah, Ethan, and Liam stood beside their mother, matching navy blazers over crisp white shirts, making them look like miniature executives at 5 years old. Their presence at the ceremony was deliberate. Emma wanted them to witness and remember this milestone. "Mommy, can we see the special room now?" Ethan whispered, tugging at her hand after the formal speeches concluded. Emma smiled, leading her 3 sons toward the elevator. "Yes, let's go see your laboratory." On the building's 3rd floor, adjacent to Emma's executive office, she had designed a glass-enclosed space specifically for the triplets, a state-of-the-art children's laboratory where they could explore their burgeoning interests under supervision when they visited the office after school. "This is way better than the corner of the living room!" Liam exclaimed, running toward a workbench equipped with child-sized tools and simple electronics. Noah immediately gravitated toward the mathematics station, where geometric models and advanced puzzles awaited. Ethan explored the small podium complete with microphone and recording equipment, tools for the natural communicator who already showed signs of exceptional verbal ability. "Mrs. Sullivan, the investors are waiting in the conference room," her assistant reminded gently. "It's Ms." Emma corrected automatically, a reflex developed over years of similar assumptions. "I'll be right there. Can you ask Maria to stay with the boys?" In the sleek conference room, Emma presented the quarterly results to her investors. Growth that exceeded projections by 17%, successful implementation of their adaptive systems in 23 major medical centers, and a rapidly expanding patent portfolio. The New Beginnings neural adaptive system was revolutionizing how people with motor limitations interacted with technology, creating independence where dependence had been the only option. "The testimonials are extraordinary," commented Daniel Freeman, her first investor who now served on the advisory board, particularly from the Parkinson's patients at Massachusetts General. Emma nodded, pulling up a video on the presentation screen. A middle-aged man with advanced Parkinson's tremors demonstrated how the New Beginnings interface allowed him to write emails independently for the first time in years. "I can talk to my children again," the man said, tears in his eyes. "I'm not trapped in silence anymore." The emotional impact of these human stories was undeniable. By focusing on real people with real needs, Emma had built more than a technology company. She had created a mission that resonated with both investors and customers. Later that afternoon, Emma observed a demonstration of the latest system refinements in the company's testing laboratory. A paraplegic veteran navigated complex software using only subtle head movements and eye tracking, the interface adapting in real time to his specific capabilities. "The neural response time has improved by 38%, explained Dr. Mehta, the neuroscientist Emma had recruited from MIT the previous year. "We're approaching natural interaction speeds." Emma watched intently as the veteran completed tasks that would have been impossible with standard interfaces. "This is why we exist," she said quietly. By 6 o'clock, Emma had collected the triplets from the company childcare center and headed home to their new house in a quiet Boston suburb. A modest but comfortable 4-bedroom home with a backyard where the boys could play. The purchase had been another milestone, a permanent address after years of temporary solutions. After dinner, Emma sat at the kitchen table reviewing school reports while the boys worked on projects in the playroom. Noah's teacher had requested a meeting to discuss advancing him 2 grade levels in mathematics. Ethan's dramatic skills had earned him the lead in the school play despite being younger than other cast members. Liam had dismantled and reassembled the classroom computer when it malfunctioned, earning both praise for his ingenuity and a gentle reminder about asking permission first. As Emma signed permission slips and checked homework, she noticed Ethan standing in the doorway, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Mom, Tommy asked me why I look like the man in the business magazine but have a different last name." Emma's hand froze mid-signature. She had known this moment would come eventually. The triplets' resemblance to Jackson grew more pronounced with each passing year. The same sharp jawline, penetrating green eyes, and expressive eyebrows that had once captivated her. "Which magazine, sweetheart?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Ethan retrieved a copy of Business Insider from his backpack. Jackson's face stared up from the page, a feature on rising stars in investment banking. "Tommy's dad works at a bank and had this. He said this man looks exactly like us." Noah and Liam appeared behind their brother, curiosity piqued by the conversation. Emma realized all three were waiting for an explanation, their identical expressions focused with an intensity that belied their 5 years. "Come sit down," she said, patting the chairs around the table. When all three were seated, she took a deep breath. "That man is Jackson Reed. He's your biological father." "Biological father?" Noah repeated, testing the term. "So he made us, but doesn't live with us?" "That's right," Emma confirmed. "Sometimes adults make choices about what kind of life they want, and his choice didn't include being a parent." "Did he meet us? Does he know what we look like?" Liam asked, studying the magazine photo with scientific detachment. Emma maintained her composure despite the ache in her chest. "He knew I was pregnant, but he hasn't met you. He made his decision before you were born." "Was he mean to you?" Ethan asked perceptively, his emotional intelligence already remarkably developed. Emma considered her answer carefully. "He made choices that hurt me deeply at the time, but without those choices I might never have built new beginnings, and our life might be very different." The boys processed this information with surprising maturity, asking practical questions rather than expressing distress. Emma answered honestly without burdening them with adult emotions or planting seeds of resentment. "If we wanted to meet him someday, would that make you sad?" Noah asked finally. Emma's throat tightened, but she maintained her steady gaze. "When you're older, if you want to know him, I'll support your decision. My feelings about your father are separate from your right to know where you come from." That night, after tucking the boys into bed, Emma allowed herself a moment of reflection. She opened her laptop and typed Jackson's name into a search engine, something she rarely permitted herself to do. Recent articles showed his rising status at Goldman Sachs, his marriage to Alexis Van Meter, and their prominent position in Manhattan society. One photo showed the couple at a charity gala, Jackson in a tuxedo with his arm around his wife, who wore diamonds that caught the camera flash. They were the picture of success and privilege, exactly the life he had claimed Emma would never fit into. "You were right about one thing, Jackson," Emma whispered to the screen. "I never would have fit into your world. I was meant to build my own." The following week, Emma was invited to speak at a rehabilitation center where New Beginnings technology had been implemented throughout the facility. As she demonstrated the system's capabilities to medical professionals, a familiar figure entered the conference room. For a disorienting moment, Emma thought she was looking at Jackson. The man had the same confident stride, the same perfectly tailored suit. Then she realized it was Thomas Reed, Jackson's father, whom she had met briefly at a charity function during their relationship. Thomas showed no sign of recognition as he took a seat among the hospital board members. Emma continued her presentation without faltering, her professional demeanor masking the emotional jolt of this unexpected connection to her past. After the presentation, as attendees networked over coffee, Thomas approached Emma with an outstretched hand. "Impressive technology, Ms. Sullivan. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Thomas Reed, I represent several healthcare investment groups." Emma accepted his handshake, her grip firm and confident. "We've actually met before, Mr. Reed, though it was some years ago at the Metropolitan Museum fundraiser." Thomas studied her face, confusion evident. "I apologize, I don't recall. I was with your son, Jackson. We were together for nearly 3 years." Recognition dawned slowly, followed by visible discomfort. "Emma, yes, of course, you've changed." "Life has a way of transforming us," she replied evenly. "It's been 5 years since I last saw any member of the Reed family." Thomas cleared his throat, clearly searching for appropriate words. Jackson is doing well. Recently made director at Goldman. Married now to Alexis Van Meter. I'm aware, Emma said simply. Please extend my congratulations. As Thomas prepared to leave, an uncomfortable curiosity visibly overtook him. And you've done well for yourself, it seems. I have 3 wonderful sons and a company valued at $120 million, Emma replied, allowing herself this small moment of vindication. So yes, I've done quite well. She watched Thomas's expression shift as he processed this information, clearly connecting the timeline. 3 sons? Triplets, Emma confirmed, maintaining eye contact. They're 5 now. Quite remarkable boys. Before Thomas could respond, Emma excused herself to speak with the hospital director, leaving Jackson's father standing with his unasked questions. That evening in her laboratory, Emma worked with her development team on the most ambitious project yet, miniaturized neural implants that could potentially restore movement capabilities to patients with spinal cord injuries. The concept had begun as a theoretical exploration, but had evolved into a promising prototype under Emma's persistent direction. If we reduce the transmitter size by another 30%, we could minimize invasiveness while maintaining signal integrity, Emma suggested, marking adjustments on the holographic display. Dr. Mehta nodded thoughtfully. The challenge is power consumption. At this scale, traditional batteries are inadequate. What about harnessing kinetic energy from the body itself? Suggested Liam, who had been quietly observing from his designated corner of the lab where he was permitted to sit during these sessions. The entire development team turned to stare at the 5-year-old, who continued matter-of-factly, like those watches that wind themselves when you move your arm. Emma exchanged glances with Dr. Mehta, who raised his eyebrows in appreciation. From the mouths of babes, he murmured. It's actually worth exploring. As she watched her son return to his drawing pad, satisfied with his contribution, Emma felt a surge of pride that transcended professional accomplishment. While Jackson pursued wealth and status, she was nurturing 3 extraordinary minds that might someday change the world in ways even she couldn't imagine. While observing her sons sleeping, their faces increasingly resembling the man who had rejected them, Emma had no idea that in a few years they would be face-to-face with Jackson Reed, in a confrontation that would make Wall Street stop to watch the past collecting its price. Emma brushed a strand of hair from Liam's forehead as he slept, the moonlight casting soft shadows across features that grew more like Jackson's with each passing day. 7 years had passed since that frigid December night when she'd been cast out into the snow, pregnant and alone. 7 years of relentless work, sacrifice, and gradual triumph. As she quietly closed the door to the boys' bedroom, Emma reflected on how thoroughly her life had transformed from surviving to thriving. The following morning, Emma stood in the center of New Beginning's expansive laboratory, observing as her team of neuroscientists calibrated the latest prototype of their adaptive interface. The warehouse-turned-tech hub hummed with focused energy as 50 specialists worked across the open floor plan, developing technologies that had put the company on the innovation map. The neural response time has improved by 18% since last week, reported Dr. Mehta, adjusting settings on the holographic display. We're approaching natural interaction speeds. Excellent, Emma replied, studying the real-time data streams. Schedule trials with the veterans group for Thursday. I want first-hand feedback on the improved responsiveness. At 35, Emma had grown into her role as CEO with quiet confidence. Her simple yet elegant attire, a tailored navy pantsuit today, reflected her practical approach to leadership. She maintained a demanding schedule that would crush most executives, yet managed it with a precision born from years of balancing motherhood with corporate growth. Back in her glass-walled office, Emma reviewed the quarterly projections while occasionally glancing at the framed photo on her desk, the triplets at their 7th birthday celebration last month. Noah, Ethan, and Liam stood together, arms linked, identical grins revealing missing front teeth. Though identical in appearance, their distinct personalities had blossomed in fascinating ways. Her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Sullivan, the boys' school is on line 1. Emma picked up immediately. "This is Emma Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan, this is Principal Whitaker from Brookfield Academy. I'm calling about Noah." A flutter of concern tightened Emma's chest. "Is he all right?" "He's fine physically, but there's been an incident involving his mathematics project. He's challenged his teacher's approach to statistical analysis, and, quite frankly, he's correct. The equations he's developed are several years beyond standard curriculum." Emma suppressed a smile. "I see. We'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss appropriate placement. Noah's mathematical abilities are exceeding our advanced program parameters." Similar calls had come about each boy in recent months. Ethan had organized a school-wide debate tournament, creating a sophisticated scoring system that impressed the high school debate coach. Liam had redesigned the science lab's ventilation system after determining its inefficiencies posed potential safety risks. By afternoon, Emma sat in her company's advanced robotics lab, watching as a patient with severe motor limitations tested their newest interface. Using only eye movements, the man successfully navigated complex software, emotions playing across his face as technology bridged the gap his body couldn't cross. "This is freedom," he whispered, tears tracking down his cheeks. "Do you understand what you've given me?" Emma nodded, her own eyes misting. These moments, witnessing the human impact of her work, fueled her through sleepless nights and endless challenges. What had begun as determination to prove Jackson wrong had evolved into something far more meaningful, a mission to restore independence to those society often overlooked. Later that evening, Emma arrived at Brookfield Academy's autumn showcase, where the triplets were presenting projects they'd developed over the semester. The auditorium buzzed with parents and educators examining displays created by gifted students from across the region. Noah stood confidently beside his mathematical model predicting traffic flow patterns, explaining complex algorithms to fascinated adults. Ethan captivated an audience with his presentation on communication strategies across cultures, his natural charisma drawing people in. Liam demonstrated a miniature water filtration system he'd designed for emergency disaster relief. "They're quite extraordinary," remarked Professor Winters, who had remained a steadfast mentor to both Emma and the boys, not just intellectually but in character. "You've done remarkable work, Emma." "We've done remarkable work," Emma corrected, acknowledging the network of support she'd carefully constructed around her sons. From Professor Winters to Daniel Freeman, from Coach Martinez who taught them basketball to Dr. Mehta who entertained their endless scientific questions, Emma had ensured her boys had positive male influences throughout their development. The weekend brought a rare day dedicated solely to family. Emma took the boys sailing on Boston Harbor, a tradition she'd established to connect them to the city's maritime heritage. On the small rented sailboat, the triplets worked in seamless coordination, adjusting lines and navigating with the focus they brought to everything. "Mom, why don't we ever talk about our father?" Noah asked suddenly as they floated in a quiet cove, the Boston skyline shimmering in the distance. Emma had expected this question would resurface periodically as they grew older. "What would you like to know?" she asked calmly. "Tommy's dad came to career day and talked about being a lawyer," Ethan continued, "and Miguel's dad coaches his soccer team. Why doesn't our dad do anything with us?" Emma chose her words carefully. "Your father lives in New York. He works in finance at a company called Goldman Sachs. He made a choice before you were born that he wasn't ready to be a parent." "Because he didn't want us?" Liam asked, his voice small despite his usual confidence. "Because he didn't understand what he would be missing," Emma corrected gently. "His choice reflects who he is, not your worth." "Do we look like him?" Noah asked, ever practical in his curiosity. Instead of answering directly, Emma reached into her bag and retrieved a folder containing carefully selected newspaper articles and magazine profiles featuring Jackson. She had prepared this years ago, knowing this moment would eventually come. "This is your father," she said simply, watching their expressions as they studied the photographs. The resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp jawline, intense green eyes, and expressive eyebrows stared back from the glossy pages. The boys examined the articles in silence, absorbing information about the stranger whose genetic imprint they carried. "He looks successful," Noah observed finally. "By certain measures he is," Emma acknowledged. "He's achieved what he values most, professional recognition and social status." "Would he like us if he met us?" Ethan wondered aloud. Emma's heart ached at the simple question. "Anyone who truly knows you would recognize how exceptional you are, but I can't predict how he would react." "Can we meet him someday if we want to?" Liam asked. "When you're older, if that's something you wish to do, I will support your decision," Emma promised. "Your relationship with your father, whatever form it might take, is separate from my history with him." That night, after the boys were asleep, Emma sat at her computer reviewing the latest clinical trial data from the Neural Adaptive Systems implementation at Boston Memorial Hospital. The technology had shown unprecedented success rates in helping stroke patients regain communication capabilities. Her phone rang. Daniel Freeman, her first investor and now board member. "Emma, have you seen the Wall Street Journal announcement? Goldman Sachs is launching a healthcare technology division. They've specifically mentioned adaptive technologies for aging populations as their first target market." Emma felt a strange twist of irony. "So Jackson's company is finally noticing our industry." "This could mean competition for government contracts," Daniel warned. "They have connections in Washington we can't match." "But they don't have our technology or expertise," Emma countered. "Schedule a board meeting for Monday. We'll discuss acceleration of our veteran rehabilitation program launch." 2 weeks later, Emma stood in a state-of-the-art laboratory at the Walter Reed Medical Center, demonstrating New Beginnings' neural implant prototype to a panel of military medical officials. The miniaturized device, smaller than a rice grain, represented the culmination of 3 years' research, technology that could potentially restore limited movement functionality to patients with spinal cord injuries. Initial animal trials show 70% success in restoring intentional movement to previously paralyzed limbs, Emma explained, displaying the microscopic neural bridges that formed the heart of the technology. Human trials could begin within 18 months, pending your partnership and FDA approval. The presentation was a triumph. By evening, preliminary agreements were signed, establishing New Beginnings as the exclusive technology partner for the military's Wounded Warrior Rehabilitation Initiative, a contract that would ultimately be valued at over $400 million. As Emma's driver navigated through D.C. traffic toward Reagan National Airport, she allowed herself a moment of quiet celebration. The military contract wasn't just a business victory. It represented her company's evolution from assistive technology provider to pioneering medical innovator. The implications for patients worldwide were extraordinary. Her phone chimed with a text from Maria. Boys finished science projects. Noah's equation proved teacher's textbook wrong, again. Ethan's presentation made class give standing ovation. Liam built working model from recycled materials. Principal called all good things. Emma smiled, pride warming her chest. She had built 2 legacies simultaneously, a groundbreaking company and 3 remarkable young men. The following month, Emma was featured in a Time magazine cover story titled The Future of Accessibility: How Emma Sullivan's Technology is Changing Lives. The comprehensive profile detailed New Beginnings' rise from startup to industry leader, with particular focus on the human impact of Emma's innovations. While the article touched briefly on her status as a single mother of triplets, it focused primarily on her technological vision and business acumen. There was no mention of Jackson or abandonment. Emma had firmly established her narrative independent of her past. "Mom, you're famous," Ethan declared over breakfast, examining the magazine cover where Emma stood against a backdrop of her laboratory, looking confidently into the camera. "I'm just doing work that matters," Emma corrected, buttering toast for Liam. "The real story is the people whose lives are changing because of our technology." "But you built everything from nothing," Noah pointed out with his characteristic precision. "The article says you started with just an idea drawn on a napkin." Emma smiled at her sons, now 7 years old and increasingly aware of their unusual family story. "I had more than an idea," she said softly. "I had 3 perfect reasons to succeed." The boys beamed at her words, unaware of how completely they had transformed her pain into purpose. Where Jackson had seen complications and burdens, Emma had discovered her greatest motivation and joy. Later that week, Emma received an unexpected invitation to speak at Princeton University's annual Innovation Summit, a prestigious gathering of technology pioneers and investment leaders. The email mentioned specific interest in New Beginnings' neural implant research and its potential applications for degenerative conditions. Emma accepted immediately, recognizing the opportunity to raise the company's academic profile and attract top research talent. When she mentioned the engagement to the boys during dinner, Ethan asked an unexpected question. "Can we come with you, Mom? I want to see Princeton. My teacher says it's one of the best universities." "It's a business trip, not a vacation," Emma explained gently. "But we're part of the business too," Liam argued. "You always say we inspire your best ideas." Emma considered their eager faces. At 7, they were already thinking about universities, another reminder of their exceptional development. Perhaps exposing them to such environments early would benefit their academic aspirations. "All right," she agreed, "we'll make it an educational trip, but you'll need to behave professionally during the business portions." "We always do," Noah responded with such adult seriousness that Emma had to suppress a smile. As she helped the boys plan which books to bring for the train ride to Princeton, Emma couldn't know that this innocent academic excursion would set in motion events that would eventually bring her face to face with Jackson Reed, in a confrontation that would make Wall Street stop to watch the past collecting its price. Emma gazed out from the 53rd floor of the New Beginnings global headquarters, watching Boston Harbor shimmer in the morning light. 10 years had passed since that frozen December night when she'd been cast out into the Manhattan snow. The panoramic view before her now, an expanding skyline where her company's distinctive logo was visible on multiple buildings, served as a daily reminder of how far she had come. "Ms. Sullivan?" Her executive assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The Tokyo investors are ready for your video conference." Emma straightened her tailored Armani suit, a far cry from the worn waitress uniform she'd once worn, and turned toward the state-of-the-art conference room. "Thank you, Claire. I'll be right there." The boardroom featured a curved table of sustainable bamboo, chosen specifically for its combination of elegance and environmental responsibility. A wall of screens displayed faces of Japanese executives, their expressions respectful as Emma entered. At 40, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something substantial from nothing. "Gentlemen," she greeted in flawless Japanese, a language she'd studied specifically to facilitate these negotiations. "I'm pleased to continue our discussion about expanding New Beginnings' neural interface technology throughout the Asian market." The 2-hour meeting concluded with handshakes across continents, securing a distribution partnership that would introduce New Beginnings' adaptive technologies to 17 countries across Asia. Emma maintained her professional composure until the screens went dark, then allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "That's 4 continents now," remarked her CFO, Samantha Wells. "Not bad for a company that started on a napkin sketch." 5, actually, Emma corrected. "The Australian government signed yesterday. The New Beginnings of today barely resembled the struggling startup of 10 years ago. 900 employees occupied offices in 5 countries. The company's neural adaptive interface had become the global standard for accessibility technology, installed in everything from smartphones to medical equipment to government systems. Walking through the research and development floor, Emma observed dozens of engineers and scientists working on next-generation technologies. The core team that had been with her from the beginning, many recruited when no one else believed in her vision, now led specialized divisions focused on expanding the company's technological frontiers. The miniaturized neural implants passed the latest FDA review phase, reported Dr. Mehta, now Emma's chief science officer. Human trials could begin within 6 months. Emma studied the microscopic device under a digital magnifier. Smaller than a grain of rice, the implant represented the culmination of 5 years' research, technology that could potentially restore movement to patients with spinal cord injuries. "Excellent work," she said simply, though the implications were anything but simple. This technology could transform millions of lives, including veterans, accident victims, and those with degenerative conditions. At 3 o'clock, Emma left the office for her weekly ritual, personally picking up the triplets from school. Now 10 years old, Noah, Ethan, and Liam attended the prestigious Jefferson Academy for Exceptional Children, their remarkable abilities having long outpaced standard educational curricula. The boys bounded toward her car, identical in appearance but distinct in their approaches. Noah carried a thick folder of research papers, his methodical mind already publishing academic articles in mathematics journals. Ethan chatted animatedly with 3 classmates, his natural charisma drawing others into his orbit. Liam arrived last, distracted by the small electronic device he was disassembling as he walked. "Mom, my pattern recognition algorithm improved the neural response time by 18%, Liam announced without preamble as he climbed into the car. "The math department wants to publish Noah's paper on predictive modeling," Ethan added, always proud to announce his brother's accomplishments. "And I made the national finals for the debate championship." Emma absorbed their excitement, marveling at these extraordinary young men. At 10, they demonstrated intellectual capabilities that outpaced most adults, yet maintained the enthusiasm and curiosity of children. Their resemblance to Jackson grew more pronounced each year. The same sharp jawline, penetrating green eyes, and expressive eyebrows, but their character reflected the values Emma had instilled. "Mom, when is Professor Winters coming for dinner?" Noah asked as they drove home. "I want to show him my new theorem." Professor Alan Winters, once Emma's teacher and early supporter, had become a beloved fixture in the triplets' lives, one of several male mentors Emma had carefully integrated into their world. Coach Reyes taught them basketball and resilience. Dr. Mehta fueled their scientific curiosity. Daniel Freeman, her first investor, taught them business principles during quarterly junior entrepreneur sessions. "He's coming Thursday," Emma replied, along with Dr. Mehta and his wife. The deliberate inclusion of these positive male influences had been Emma's strategy from the beginning, ensuring her sons had diverse role models despite growing up without a father. She had never lied about Jackson, but neither had she burdened them with adult resentments. As the boys grew older, their questions about their father became more specific, more thoughtful. "I saw an article about Goldman Sachs in the Business Journal," Noah mentioned casually as they entered their home, a comfortable colonial in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood. They mentioned father's name. "He's been promoted again." Emma noted Noah's use of father rather than dad, a subtle distinction that spoke volumes. "Is that so?" "He's one of their top executives now," Noah continued, his tone neutral, factual. "The article said he's the youngest senior executive vice president in their history." "That sounds like something he would prioritize," Emma replied carefully, maintaining her long-standing policy of honesty without bitterness. Later that evening, after the boys were engrossed in their projects, Emma retreated to her home office to review the quarterly financial reports. New Beginnings had exceeded projections again, with revenues approaching $2 billion annually. The federal contract, implementing adaptive technologies throughout government agencies, had been the tipping point, establishing the company as the undisputed leader in its field. Her phone rang. Daniel Freeman, now chairman of her board of directors. "Emma, have you seen the Fortune cover?" he asked without preamble. "Not yet. I've been in meetings all day." "You made the 50 most powerful women in business list. Cover story, actually." Emma allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. External validation had never been her goal, but such recognition helped open doors that furthered the company's mission. "That's good timing with the neural implant trials approaching," she replied pragmatically. "More visibility means better recruitment for participants." Daniel chuckled. "Always the strategist. You might be the only CEO in America who sees a fortune cover as a functional tool rather than an ego boost." After hanging up, Emma opened her laptop to check the article. The cover photo showed her standing in the New Beginnings Advanced Research Laboratory, surrounded by the technology she'd pioneered. The headline read, "The Adaptive Revolution: How Emma Sullivan Built a $28 billion Empire by Solving Problems Others Ignored." The article detailed her journey from concept to global leader, emphasizing the human impact of her innovations. It mentioned her status as a single mother of triplets, but focused primarily on her technological vision and business acumen. What it didn't mention, because Emma had never discussed it publicly, was Jackson Reed or the circumstances of her son's birth. That remained private, a chapter known only to those closest to her. As she prepared for bed, Emma checked her company email one last time. A message from her head of strategy caught her attention. "Confidential. Horizon Ventures opportunity. Major acquisition potential with significant market implications. Available to discuss at your convenience." Horizon Ventures was New Beginnings' carefully disguised investment subsidiary, a vehicle Emma had established to diversify the company's holdings without attracting attention. Few knew of its existence, and even fewer understood its true purpose. The following morning, Emma met with her Chief Strategy Officer Michael Chen in a secure conference room. "We've identified a unique opportunity," Chen explained, displaying financial charts on the room's screens. "Goldman Sachs stock has experienced 3 consecutive quarters of underperformance. Their healthcare technology division is under-delivering, particularly against our adaptive systems." Emma studied the data dispassionately. "And our position?" "Horizon has already acquired approximately 16% through various channels. With current market conditions, we could reach 28% without triggering regulatory notifications." Emma considered the implications. "At that threshold, we'd be among their largest shareholders." "Effectively, yes, not controlling interest, but significant enough to influence board decisions." Chen hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The healthcare division that's underperforming. Jackson Reed is its executive sponsor." Emma's expression remained neutral, though something shifted in her eyes. "Interesting coincidence." "Is it a coincidence?" Chen asked carefully, having worked with Emma long enough to suspect there was more to the story. "Everything intersects eventually in business, Michael. Prepare the acquisition strategy. I want this handled with absolute discretion." Over the next 6 months, Horizon Ventures methodically acquired Goldman Sachs stock through various investment vehicles and proxy buyers. By winter, New Beginnings, through its subsidiary, owned 28% of the financial giant where Jackson Reed had built his career. During this same period, Emma focused on launching New Beginnings' most ambitious project yet, a revolutionary neural implant system that could potentially restore movement to patients with severe spinal injuries. The technology, developed over 5 years, represented a quantum leap in medical science. When the FDA granted preliminary approval for human trials, Emma held a press conference announcing the breakthrough. The event generated international headlines and sent New Beginnings' stock price soaring to unprecedented heights. "This isn't just a medical advance," Emma told the assembled journalists. "It's a fundamental reimagining of what's possible when technology serves human potential rather than the other way around." The market responded enthusiastically. Within weeks, New Beginnings' valuation reached $2.8 billion, officially surpassing the personal wealth Jackson had accumulated throughout his banking career. On a crisp autumn morning, Emma sat in her home office reviewing reports when her personal assistant forwarded an unusual email. Summit of Financial Innovation aboard the luxury cruise ship Manhattan Majesty. Exclusive invitation for keynote address on digital transformation. Special celebration of the 45th birthday of a prominent Wall Street figure. The invitation didn't explicitly name Jackson, but Emma recognized the pattern. The Manhattan Majesty was owned by Goldman Sachs for entertaining premier clients. The prominent Wall Street figure turning 45 aligned perfectly with Jackson's birth date. For several minutes, Emma stared at the invitation, weighing complex considerations. The professional opportunity was significant, a chance to showcase New Beginnings' innovations to financial decision-makers who controlled trillions in investment capital. The personal implications were more complicated. After careful deliberation, Emma composed her response. I would be honored to deliver the keynote address on adaptive technology and digital transformation. Please provide further details regarding schedule and technical requirements. I will be accompanied by my 3 sons, as this coincides with their educational project on business development. She hit send before she could reconsider, then called the triplets into her office. How would you 3 feel about joining me for a business trip to New York? There's an important technology summit, and I think it would be valuable for your education. On that cruise ship? Noah asked, having already noticed the email on her screen with his characteristic attention to detail. Yes, the Manhattan Majesty. It's a floating conference center owned by a major investment bank. Goldman Sachs, Noah stated rather than asked. The boys had become increasingly aware of the business landscape, particularly areas intersecting with their mother's company. Yes, Emma confirmed simply. The 3 exchanged glances, a silent communication they'd perfected over years. Will father be there? Ethan asked directly. Emma met their identical green eyes, Jackson's eyes, with steady composure. It's possible. The event coincides with his birthday. Another silent exchange passed between the triplets before Liam spoke. We should go. It's time we understood that part of our history too. As Emma prepared for this pivotal journey, she didn't realize she was about to orchestrate the most devastating encounter in recent Wall Street history. A reunion that would not only expose the truth, but redefine the legacy of one of Manhattan's most powerful financial families. The New York skyline glittered like a jewelry box against the twilight sky as Emma stood in her hotel suite, adjusting the simple pearl earrings that complemented her midnight blue designer suit. The transformation from the frightened pregnant woman who had once wandered these streets homeless to the confident CEO preparing to board a luxury cruise ship was complete in every visible way. Yet internally, Emma felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. Not about the keynote speech she would deliver, but about the possibility of seeing Jackson Reed face to face after 15 years. Mom, is this tie straight? Ethan asked, tugging at the silk fabric that matched his brother's identical navy blue suits. At 15, the triplets had grown into handsome young men whose resemblance to their father was undeniable. Tall for their age, with Jackson's chiseled features softened only slightly by their youth, they looked like young executives rather than teenagers. Perfect, Emma replied, smoothing his collar. You all look very professional. Noah, ever observant, studied his mother's face. You're nervous. This isn't about the speech, is it? Emma had never been able to hide her true emotions from her sons, particularly Noah, whose analytical mind missed nothing. It's complicated. This event represents a significant business opportunity, but it also intersects with our personal history. Because our biological father will be there, Liam stated directly. The most inventive of the triplets, Liam approached problems, even emotional ones, with pragmatic clarity. Yes, Emma confirmed, seeing no reason to shield them from the truth they had already deduced. The celebration is for his 45th birthday, though the invitation didn't explicitly state that. Are you worried about how he'll react to seeing us? Ethan asked, his natural empathy detecting the subtle tension in her posture. Emma considered her answer carefully. "I'm not worried for myself. I've built a life that speaks for itself. I'm more concerned about protecting you three from any potential awkwardness." "We're not children anymore, Mom," Noah reminded her. "We understand more than you might think about what happened." Emma smiled, touching his cheek gently. "I know. You three have always understood more than anyone expected." The Black Town car arrived precisely at 7:30, carrying them through Manhattan's crowded streets to the harbor where the Manhattan Majesty waited, its decks illuminated against the darkening sky. The cruise ship was a floating palace of luxury, designed specifically for Goldman Sachs's most exclusive events. Even from the dock, Emma could see crystal chandeliers glittering through the windows and staff in crisp uniforms attending to arriving guests. "Impressive," Noah commented as they approached the gangway. "Though statistically speaking, the environmental impact of such vessels is—" "Perhaps save the critique for another time," Emma suggested gently, noting the photographers positioned along the entrance. As they stepped onto the red-carpeted boarding area, Emma felt rather than saw the recognition ripple through the gathered press. Flashbulbs erupted around them, and she heard her name being called by financial reporters who recognized the CEO featured recently on Fortune's cover. "Ms. Sullivan, are you speaking at the summit?" called one journalist. "Yes, I'm delivering the keynote on adaptive technology and digital transformation," Emma replied smoothly, guiding her sons forward without breaking stride. They ascended the gangway with practiced composure, the triplets matching their mother's confident pace. At the entrance, a staff member checked their invitation. "Emma Sullivan and guests," the young woman read, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized the name. "Welcome aboard the Manhattan Majesty. The welcome reception is being held in the Grand Ballroom on Deck 3. The interior of the ship was even more opulent than Emma had anticipated. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, while arrangements of exotic orchids adorned every surface. Financial elite in formal attire mingled throughout the space, the soft murmur of powerful conversations underlying the classical quartet playing in the corner. "Remember," Emma said quietly to her sons as they approached the ballroom entrance, "this is primarily a business opportunity. Observe, learn, and maintain professional demeanor regardless of what happens." "Yes, Mom," they answered in perfect unison, a habit they had never outgrown. The grand ballroom took Emma's breath away despite her familiarity with luxury environments. Soaring ceilings with intricate gold leaf details crowned a space large enough to accommodate hundreds of guests. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline, now fully illuminated against the night sky. Swarovski crystal fixtures caught and multiplied the light, while massive arrangements of white orchids created an atmosphere of rarefied elegance. As they entered, Emma immediately noticed the subtle shift in attention. The CEO of New Beginnings Technology was a recognized figure in business circles, particularly after the recent Fortune cover and the groundbreaking neural implant announcement. Heads turned, whispers circulated, and several people began moving in their direction. "Ms. Sullivan," greeted an elegant older woman whom Emma recognized as a Federal Reserve Board member. "What an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you would be joining us." "I'm delivering tomorrow's keynote on digital transformation," Emma explained, introducing her sons with quiet pride. As they navigated the crowd, the triplets attracted curious glances. Their identical appearance was striking enough, but it was their poised demeanor that seemed most remarkable for teenagers. They engaged confidently with business leaders who approached, displaying knowledge that belied their 15 years. Emma was speaking with the Secretary of Commerce when she felt Noah stiffen beside her. Following his gaze across the room, she saw what had caught his attention: a massive welcome banner featuring a professional photograph of Jackson Reed, with text announcing the celebration of his 45th birthday and recent promotion to Executive Vice President. "That man looks exactly like us," Ethan whispered, his voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to overhear. Before Emma could respond, The crowd shifted, and suddenly, there he was. Jackson Reed stood at the center of the ballroom, surrounded by admirers, a champagne flute in his hand. 15 years had treated him well, adding distinguished touches of silver at his temples while maintaining his athletic build. Beside him stood a woman Emma recognized from society pages as Vanessa Reed, his second wife, a former Victoria's Secret model at least 15 years his junior, draped in diamonds and designer silk. For a suspended moment, Emma simply observed him, the man who had once been the center of her world, now a stranger whose genetic imprint was visible in the three young men standing beside her. She felt oddly detached, as though watching a scene from someone else's life. Then Jackson looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Emma witnessed the precise moment of recognition. His expression transformed from polished charm to shock, his face draining of color as his gaze moved from her to the three teenagers at her side. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that momentarily silenced nearby conversations. "Mommy, that man in the poster looks exactly like us," Ethan exclaimed, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet, one finger pointing directly at the banner. All eyes followed his gesture, moving between the enormous photograph of Jackson and the three boys who were undeniably his mirror images. The silence deepened as connections were made, calculations performed, and implications understood. Vanessa Reed's perfect features contorted in confusion as she looked between her husband and the three teenagers. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, her knuckles whitening around the crystal stem. With visible effort, Jackson composed himself, handing his broken glass to a nearby server and straightening his bespoke suit jacket. He approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, moving with the deliberate control of someone navigating an unexpected minefield. "Emma," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "What a surprise! I didn't know you would be here." "I was invited as the keynote speaker," Emma replied calmly, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "Apparently my company is considered a case study in disruptive innovation." Jackson's eyes kept darting to the triplets, unable to process the living evidence of his past standing before him. Dozens of smartphones and professional cameras captured his reaction, the moment instantly immortalized across social media platforms and financial news outlets. "These are my sons," Emma said, her crystalline voice carrying effortlessly through the silent ballroom. "Noah, Ethan, and Liam Sullivan." Vanessa stepped forward, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "Sullivan? Like you?" she asked Emma, her voice trembling. "Exactly like me," Emma confirmed, maintaining eye contact. The implications hung in the air like smoke, impossible to disperse or ignore. Nearby guests began whispering, financial reporters tapped urgently on their phones, and photographers captured frame after frame of the tableau. Jackson Reed facing the children he had abandoned, while his young wife visibly calculated the timeline of events that had occurred before their marriage. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Reed," Noah said with perfect politeness, extending his hand. "Your work in structured finance has been quite influential, though your recent healthcare division performance metrics suggest room for improvement." Jackson automatically shook the boy's hand, visibly stunned by both the gesture and the sophisticated analysis from a teenager who was unmistakably his son. "Thank you," he managed, looking as though he might be ill. The dinner chime sounded, providing momentary relief from the unbearable tension. Guests began moving toward their assigned tables, though many lingered to witness more of the unfolding drama. Emma checked the seating chart displayed on an ornate easel. "It appears we're at the head table," she noted, turning to her sons. "Shall we?" The formal dinner that followed became a masterclass in power dynamics. Jackson, seated at the center of the head table as the guest of honor, attempted to deliver his prepared remarks about innovation in financial markets. But his voice trembled noticeably whenever he glanced at the three identical young men seated across from him. Vanessa maintained a frozen smile, her eyes darting between her husband and the teenagers who were so clearly his offspring. Between courses, Jackson approached Emma at a relatively quiet corner of the ballroom, his composure visibly strained. "We need to talk," he said urgently, privately. "I believe we're talking now," Emma replied calmly. Jackson glanced around, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a checkbook. With shaking hands, he wrote a figure with multiple zeros and tore out the check. "To compensate for the past," he murmured, sweat beading on his forehead as he handed it to her. "We can resolve this situation civilized." Emma examined the check with a neutral expression before tearing it neatly in half. "My sons don't have a price tag, unlike your company's shares that have plummeted 60% since I secured the federal technology contract." Jackson's face paled further as understanding dawned. "The government contract? That was your company?" "New Beginnings Technology," Emma confirmed. "By the way, I imagine you haven't noticed that our subsidiary, Horizon Ventures, acquired 28% of your company's shares over the last quarter. Technically, I'm one of your principal shareholders now." The news spread through the ship like wildfire. Throughout the evening, Emma noticed investors who had been clustered around Jackson gravitating toward her instead. When the time came for her keynote presentation, she commanded the stage with quiet authority, describing New Beginnings' journey without directly mentioning the abandonment, but leaving clear implications between the lines about building an empire alone while raising 3 extraordinary sons. Jackson, visibly shaken, attempted to regain control of the situation by announcing a partnership with direct competitors of Emma's company. The move might have been impressive had Noah not politely risen from his seat during the question period to correct a critical financial calculation in Jackson's presentation, exposing a fundamental flaw in the announced strategy. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the teenager dismantled the CEO's argument with mathematical precision. "He clearly inherited his intelligence," someone commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. While the cameras captured frame after frame of Jackson paralyzed before his newly discovered sons, Emma couldn't know that by morning, the image would be splashed across the New York Times with the headline, "The Reunion That Shook Wall Street, CEO Jackson Reed, Face to Face with His Past." The flash of cameras continued to illuminate the grand ballroom of the Manhattan Majesty as the evening's formal proceedings concluded. Emma stood poised at the edge of the gathering, observing the subtle shift in the room's dynamics. Financial titans who had been orbiting Jackson all evening now gravitated toward her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and recalculation. The tension aboard the luxury vessel was palpable, hanging in the air like the crystal chandeliers above them. Every conversation seemed to pause momentarily when Jackson passed, replaced by urgent whispers and sidelong glances at the 3 teenagers who were undeniable proof of a past he had tried to bury. Ms. Sullivan approached a silver-haired board member of Goldman Sachs whom Emma recognized immediately. "Your presentation was remarkable. Perhaps we could discuss potential synergies between our organizations over breakfast tomorrow." "I'd be delighted," Emma replied with practiced ease, noting how the man's eyes darted between her and the triplets standing nearby. The formal dinner had transformed into a networking reception, with guests moving between elegant seating areas scattered throughout the ballroom. Jackson stood with a small group of loyal associates, his usual commanding presence diminished by the evening's revelations. His wife Vanessa had disappeared entirely, reportedly retreating to their suite shortly after Emma's presentation. As Emma guided her sons through a conversation with the Commerce Secretary, she felt rather than saw Jackson approach from behind. His cologne, still the same exclusive blend he had worn 15 years ago, reached her seconds before his voice. "We need to talk," he said, his tone attempting authority but betraying desperation. "Privately. Now." Emma turned, maintaining perfect composure. "My sons and I were just discussing the implementation challenges of neural adaptive systems with the secretary. Perhaps you'd like to join the conversation?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "This is not appropriate venue for family discussions." Noah, ever observant, stepped forward. "I believe what Mr. Reed means is that he would prefer to discuss the implications of our existence away from public scrutiny." His clinical assessment made several nearby guests shift uncomfortably. "Precisely," Jackson confirmed, relief flashing briefly across his features at being understood. Emma considered for a moment. "The boys and I will meet you on the upper deck observation lounge in 20 minutes. I believe it's closed to other guests after 11. When Jackson walked away, Ethan turned to his mother. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" "I've been prepared for this conversation for 15 years, Emma replied calmly. "And so have you three, whether you realized it or not." The upper deck observation lounge was deserted as promised, its panoramic windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan's illuminated skyline. Emma and the triplets arrived precisely on time to find Jackson already waiting, pacing nervously beside a marble-topped bar. "Thank you for coming," he began awkwardly, his practiced charm abandoned in the face of this unprecedented situation. "You requested this meeting," Emma reminded him, her voice even. "We're here to listen." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar to Emma it created an unexpected pang of recognition. The triplets had inherited the same unconscious movement when concentrating deeply. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted, looking at the three boys with a mixture of wonder and discomfort. "They're extraordinary. Identical triplets. What are the odds?" "Approximately 1 in 200,000 naturally occurring births," Noah supplied automatically, though our case presented additional statistical anomalies due to the premature delivery. Jackson stared at him, clearly unnerved by the teenager's clinical precision. "You all seem remarkably advanced for your age." "We test in the exceptional range across all measured aptitudes," Liam confirmed without a hint of boasting, "though each of us has developed specialized interests." "I see." Jackson cleared his throat. "I suppose I should explain that you abandoned our mother when she told you she was pregnant," Ethan interrupted, his usual diplomacy replaced by directness. "Or that you called her an investment doomed to fail?" Jackson paled. "She told you that?" "Our mother has never spoken ill of you," Noah clarified, "but we're capable of research. Your reaction to her pregnancy is documented in several places, including her private journals, which she gave us access to when we turned 14. Emma remained silent, allowing her sons to navigate this encounter on their terms. They had discussed this possibility for years, what they might say if they ever met their father, and she trusted their emotional preparation. "I was young," Jackson began, his voice dropping into the persuasive tone that had once convinced investors to trust him with millions. "My career was at a critical juncture. The timing was challenging. You were 30 years old with family wealth as a safety net," Liam pointed out. "Our mother was 28 with no support system. The asymmetry of vulnerability suggests your decision was based on convenience rather than necessity." Jackson's expression hardened slightly. "You can't possibly understand the pressures I was under." "Actually, we've studied your career trajectory quite thoroughly," Noah countered. "The quarterly performance reports from Goldman Sachs during that period indicate your division was already exceeding projections. Your promotion was announced 3 weeks after you expelled our mother from your apartment." A flicker of shame crossed Jackson's face before his professional mask reasserted itself. He turned to Emma. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I'm prepared to make amends now." He reached into his jacket, producing another check. "This is more substantial than my earlier offer. I want to establish trust funds for the boys, provide for their education." "Harvard has already offered Noah a full academic scholarship," Emma interrupted calmly. "Ethan has been invited to participate in Yale's accelerated program next fall. Liam's algorithm for neural response optimization has generated 3 patent applications that will fund whatever educational path he chooses." Jackson stared at her, visibly struggling to process this information. "They're 15. "Yes," Emma confirmed simply. I could open doors for them, Jackson persisted, shifting strategies. Connections, opportunities, access to people and institutions that would advance their careers. Ethan smiled politely. With respect, Mr. Reed, our mother has already introduced us to 4 Nobel laureates, 3 former cabinet secretaries, and the founders of the world's leading technology companies. Your social network, while impressive in financial circles, offers limited incremental value to our development. Jackson's composure cracked further, his desperation becoming more evident. What do you want from me then? Why are you here? We're here because our mother was invited to deliver the keynote address at this summit, Liam explained patiently. Our presence is incidental to that professional obligation. And to learn, Noah added. Mother believes in educational experiences. Jackson ran both hands through his hair now, abandoning any pretense of control. 15 years, he muttered, more to himself than to them. 15 years is a long time. I was different then, young, ambitious, scared. And I was alone, pregnant, and penniless, Emma said, breaking her silence. The simple statement hung in the air between them, unembellished and devastating in its truth. A tense silence filled the observation lounge, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engines and the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Manhattan's skyline glittered beyond the windows, the city's wealth and power displayed in towers of light and steel. What happens now? Jackson finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. Nothing happens, Emma replied evenly. We're not here for revenge, Jackson. Revenge would be using my position as a major shareholder to have you removed from your company, which would be entirely possible given the alliances I've formed with your board members. I'm here because I was invited as a market leader, and I brought my sons to experience the world I've built for them. You really own 28% of Goldman? Jackson asked, the financial implications finally penetrating his emotional shock. Through various channels, yes. It was a strategic investment decision made last year when your healthcare technology division began underperforming against market projections. Jackson's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a reluctant respect. You've become formidable. I had powerful motivation, Emma replied, glancing at her sons. The triplets exchanged looks, their silent communication as seamless as always. Noah stepped forward, extending his hand formally. It was informative to meet you, Mr. Reed. I wish you success with your upcoming restructuring challenges. Jackson accepted the handshake automatically, visibly thrown by the teenager's professional demeanor. Ethan and Liam followed suit, each offering a polite but distant farewell. That's it? Jackson asked as they turned to leave. 15 years, and that's all you have to say to me? The triplets paused, looking to their mother. Emma nodded slightly, giving them permission to speak freely. What would you have us say? Liam asked with genuine curiosity. We've grown up without your presence. Meeting you doesn't fundamentally alter our identities or trajectories. You're our biological father, Ethan acknowledged, his natural empathy softening his words. But that's a biological fact, not an emotional reality. You can't expect an instant connection after 15 years of absence. I could be part of your lives going forward, Jackson offered, an unfamiliar note of pleading in his voice. I could be a father to you now. Noah regarded him with analytical precision. Parenthood isn't a role one steps into at convenience. Our mother has been both mother and father to us. She's attended every science fair, debate tournament, and doctor's appointment. She's built bedtime stories and business empires with equal dedication. That can't be replicated or replaced. Morning light streamed through the windows of Emma's suite as she prepared for the final day of the summit. The triplets were already dressed in their matching suits, reviewing the day's schedule with characteristic thoroughness. The New York Times headline has been published, Noah announced, holding up his tablet to display the front page. The digital edition showed a striking photograph of Jackson frozen in shock, staring at the three teenagers who were his mirror image. The headline read, "The Reunion That Shook Wall Street. CEO Jackson Reed, Face to Face with His Past." The article mentions questions of character being raised by Goldman Sachs shareholders, Ethan noted, scanning the text, and references to an emergency board meeting being called. Emma absorbed this information calmly as she fastened her pearl earrings. That was predictable. Financial institutions are particularly sensitive to public perception issues. A text message alert sounded on her phone. "Vanessa Reed has checked out of the ship," Liam reported, having glanced at the screen. "According to the crew member who just messaged you, she left at 6 this morning for their Hampton house." "Also predictable," Emma commented, feeling no satisfaction in another woman's pain, regardless of the circumstances. As they prepared to disembark for the morning sessions being held at Goldman Sachs headquarters, Noah approached his mother with an uncharacteristically hesitant expression. "Mom, was meeting him what you expected?" Emma considered the question carefully. "I stopped having expectations about Jackson Reed a long time ago. What matters isn't who he is, but who you three have become despite his absence." "He seemed smaller than I imagined," Ethan observed thoughtfully. "Most fears do, once confronted," Emma replied, gathering her presentation materials. "Remember, your worth was never determined by his recognition. You three defined yourselves through your own choices and accomplishments." As Emma guided her sons toward the gangway, where press photographers had already gathered in anticipation, she felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun 15 years ago in pain and rejection had transformed into something powerful and redemptive, not through vengeance, but through the simple, irrefutable evidence of success built against impossible odds. While the cameras captured frame after frame of their departure, Jackson Reed remained behind on the upper deck, watching the empire he had never known slip away from him, an empire far more valuable than any fortune he had accumulated. The front page of the New York Times lay spread across breakfast tables throughout Manhattan, its headline impossible to ignore. "The Reunion That Shook Wall Street. CEO Jackson Reed, Face to Face with His Past." The photograph captured Jackson's stunned expression as he stared at three teenagers whose faces mirrored his own, while Emma Sullivan stood composed beside them, 15 years of vindication embodied in her elegant posture. In the executive suite of Goldman Sachs, an emergency board meeting had been hastily convened. Senior partners gathered around a polished mahogany table, their expressions grim as they passed tablets displaying not only the Times article, but dozens of similar headlines across financial publications. "The optics are catastrophic," stated Bernard Keller, the longest-serving board member. "Abandoning a pregnant woman, triplets no less, then building his career on family values rhetoric. The hypocrisy is staggering." "His wife has already flown to Hamptons and contacted Sheila Novak," added another partner, referring to the city's most feared divorce attorney. "My sources say she's exploring a dissolution on grounds of fraudulent representation." At the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, Emma sat with her sons enjoying a quiet breakfast before the day's final summit sessions. Their phones continuously lit up with notifications as the story spread across financial networks and social media platforms. "Our stock is up 17% this morning," Noah remarked, scrolling through market updates. "Goldman's has dropped 12. Emma buttered her toast with steady hands. "Markets react emotionally to unexpected revelations. It will stabilize." "Mom," Ethan said gently, "people are calling this your revenge. Does that bother you?" Emma considered the question, setting down her knife. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finding its way to the surface. Truth has a weight that falsehood can't sustain indefinitely. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. The hotel manager appeared, looking somewhat flustered. "Ms. Sullivan, I apologize for the intrusion. There's a call for you from Goldman Sachs's executive office. The board is requesting your presence for a private meeting." 30 minutes later, Emma entered the imposing Goldman Sachs headquarters, her sons flanking her like honor guards. The triplets had insisted on accompanying her despite her assurances that she could handle the meeting alone. "We're stakeholders too," Liam had pointed out reasonably, "both biologically and financially." The executive boardroom fell silent as they entered. 12 board members sat around the massive table with one conspicuously empty chair, Jackson's. Bernard Keller rose to greet them, his manner formal but respectful. "Ms. Sullivan, thank you for coming on such short notice. Gentlemen," he acknowledged the triplets with a nod, "please be seated." Emma took the offered chair with practiced ease, her posture perfect in her tailored Armani suit. The contrast between this entrance and how she'd last left a Goldman Sachs building, pregnant and weeping on the sidewalk after attempting to access their joint account, wasn't lost on her. "Mr. Reed has been temporarily relieved of his duties pending a full board review," Keller began without preamble. "The revelations from last night raise significant concerns about judgment and character." Emma maintained her neutral expression. "I'm not here to influence your personnel decisions, Mr. Keller. That would be inappropriate given my company's investment position." "That's precisely why we've asked you here," another board member interjected. "Your subsidiary holds 28% of our shares, making you our largest non-institutional investor. And given the personal history involved, the board feels a transparent conversation is necessary." "I understand," Emma replied, "but I want to be clear. New Beginnings acquired those shares based on sound investment strategy, not personal vendetta. Your healthcare technology division underperformed against market projections for 3 consecutive quarters, creating an acquisition opportunity at favorable valuation." The board members exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the woman before them. This wasn't a scorned lover seeking revenge. This was a strategic business leader who had outmaneuvered them on multiple fronts. "Ms. Sullivan," Keller said carefully, "the board would like to discuss a potential leadership transition. Given your expertise in technological innovation and your significant stake in our future, we believe you might be the ideal candidate to lead our healthcare technology division, perhaps even in a more expanded role." A murmur of agreement circulated among the board members. Emma could read between the lines. They were offering her Jackson's position, possibly with a path to even greater authority within the company. "That's a generous offer," Emma replied after a thoughtful pause, "but I must decline." Surprise registered across several faces. Noah glanced at his mother with knowing approval. "May I ask why?" Keller pressed. "The compensation package would be substantial, and your influence on the company's direction would be significant." Emma folded her hands on the table. "I don't have interest in assuming the past. My focus is on building the future. New Beginnings will remain a significant shareholder, and we look forward to constructive engagement with whomever you select for leadership. But my mission lies elsewhere." As they departed Goldman Sachs headquarters, reporters called questions from behind security barriers. Emma guided her sons toward their waiting car with practiced ease, ignoring the shouted inquiries about Jackson and their relationship. Inside the vehicle, Liam broke the silence. "You could have taken his job. That would have been the ultimate statement." Emma shook her head. "Taking his position would mean defining my success in relation to him. True victory isn't replacing him, it's building something he couldn't imagine." 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The media frenzy eventually subsided, replaced by more substantial coverage of New Beginnings' revolutionary neural implant technology, which had begun human trials with promising early results. Jackson had resigned from Goldman Sachs following a leave of absence, his departure accelerated by Vanessa's high-profile divorce filing that cited deliberate concealment of material facts prior to marriage. Financial publications speculated about the substantial settlement she would likely receive. On a brilliant spring morning, Emma stood before the gleaming new global headquarters of New Beginnings in Boston. The sustainable glass and steel structure rose 20 stories above the harbor, its innovative design already winning architectural awards. Most meaningful to Emma was its location, directly overlooking the waterfront district that included the Atlantic Pearl restaurant where she had once worked as a waitress. "Ready, Mom?" Noah asked, adjusting his tie as photographers positioned themselves for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Emma surveyed the gathering crowd. 900 employees, government officials, medical pioneers, and patients whose lives had been transformed by New Beginnings technology. The triplets, now 15 and a half, stood tall beside her, their matching suits and confident postures reflecting the extraordinary young men they had become. "Distinguished guests," Emma began once the crowd had quieted. 15 years ago in this very neighborhood, I served seafood to tourists while dreaming of making a meaningful difference in the world. Today, we dedicate this building not as a monument to personal success, but as a beacon of possibility." As her speech continued, Emma caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Thomas Reed, Jackson's father, stood partially concealed behind a column, watching the ceremony with an inscrutable expression. Their eyes met briefly before he nodded once in what appeared to be reluctant respect, then turned to leave. After cutting the ceremonial ribbon to enthusiastic applause, Emma led a tour of the building's advanced research facilities. The crown jewel was the Neural Implant Development Laboratory, where clinical trial participants demonstrated remarkable progress in regaining movement after spinal injuries. "The implications are revolutionary," explained Dr. Mehta to the awestruck visitors. "Patients with complete paralysis showing intentional movement just 8 weeks into the trial." Later that evening, the Wall Street Journal published an in-depth profile titled "The Force Behind New Beginnings: How Emma Sullivan Transformed Assistive Technology." The article described her as the transformative force in American assistive technology, highlighting both her technological innovations and her unusual path to success. As the excitement of the day wound down, Emma found herself alone in her new office at the top of the building, gazing out at the harbor where she had once watched ships while serving tables. The symmetry felt right, a complete circle from where she had started to where she now stood. Her phone chimed with a news alert. Former Goldman Sachs executive Jackson Reed faces shareholder lawsuit amid divorce proceedings. The accompanying photograph showed Jackson looking haggard as he entered a courthouse, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled, his confident posture replaced by a defensive hunch. Emma closed the notification without reading further. Jackson's unraveling held no satisfaction for her. Her victory wasn't in his downfall, but in what she had built despite his attempt to destroy her. A knock at her door revealed the triplets, who had changed from their formal suits into the New Beginnings lab coats they wore when participating in the company's Young Innovators program. "We've been thinking about the neural response algorithm," Liam began excitedly. "If we adjust the transmission frequency by 12%, we might reduce the latency issues patients are experiencing." Emma smiled, gesturing them toward the holographic display in the corner of her office. For the next hour, she lost herself in the joy of collaboration with these extraordinary minds she had nurtured, minds that might have been lost to the world had Jackson's rejection not forced her to forge an entirely different path. Across the city, Jackson Reed sat alone in his temporary apartment, watching the evening news coverage of the New Beginnings headquarters opening. The bottle of scotch beside him was half empty, matching the hollowness in his chest as he observed the empire he had never known, an empire created by the woman he had cast aside, populated by the sons he had rejected. The reporter's voice provided an unintentional epitaph to his choices. While many successful companies have compelling origin stories, few are as remarkable as New Beginnings, built by a single mother who transformed personal adversity into global innovation. Jackson turned off the television, the silence of his empty apartment emphasizing all he had lost. His corporate empire was crumbling under investigations and the impending divorce, while the investment he had once declared doomed to fail flourished beyond anyone's imagination. Emma, meanwhile, stood between her sons on the rooftop garden of their new headquarters, watching the lights of Boston Harbor twinkle below. She had finally navigated beyond the turbulent waters of the past, and the horizon before her was limitless. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen